because I think this is a nice point, I think maybe to get started with is I was talking to somebody about the toolbox, and they mentioned that they feel like they have enough tricks of attention to use, and they don't want to oversaturate with points of attention and try to continuously add new points of attention. And that's absolutely fine. That makes total sense to me. And then what we ended up kind of going towards is that, like a lot of things, there is quantity and quality. So what we're looking for, of course, way before quantity, like quantity will occur. The longer you do this practice, you start to find new tricks of attention and new places to put your mind that are, I would say, more attuned to your own temperament, your own personality. And that's fine. So you'll end up with a diverse toolbox the more you do this practice, no matter what. But the way that we dig in to the techniques can also vary. So you can have 4 or 5 techniques, have them kind of planned for different parts of the day, or maybe you add new techniques throughout the day. That's cool too, because maybe you ended up in a situation you didn't plan for. So maybe you're going to make amazing architecture your point of attention while you go through this situation that you didn't plan for. But ultimately, how, and this is maybe like the aperture of attention or the depth of attention, which is where that quality comes from. Care plus focus equals quality. So we care enough about whatever we're giving our focus to, and then we give it our pristine, at times maybe even undivided focus, like we're de-arming a bomb, or we're just like in awe of something that's occurring and it has our undivided focus. But we can kind of find different aspects to that same trick of attention, and that can create some depth with the quality of that trick of attention. Does that make sense? Quality of tricks of attention. So shadows are a real good one. I love reflections. Like, there's the way that I look at reflections has kind of evolved because the quality has gained more depth, especially when I started to expand the bubble of perception and I could see more reflections in my perceptive field of view, however we want to look at that. I could put my attention on more reflections at the same time. And I remember, I think the first time I really did this, I was in a downtown of like Champaign or something. I want to say Rantoul, but I don't know how that could be right. Rantoul is a smaller town than Champaign, just north of it, but it had an Air Force base that left. And then so when an Air Force base leaves a town, it basically becomes a ghost town and just kind of goes downhill. Too close to Chicago. So it ended up getting a lot of low income housing from Chicago, and it's not always the best areas, I suppose. But it was a rainy day, and I was able to use defocused vision, expand my bubble of perception. Even if I didn't call it that then, that's what I was doing. Because I noticed that with the bubble of perception, I could see myself in the middle of it, and I could feel it expanding out. And there's all kinds of meditators and meditations that talk about, you know, expanding your perception into the infinite. That's in Qigong. Roger at the clinic, who does Traeger approach, he was talking that way once before. So it's not a foreign concept. It makes sense. But proprioception, we're expanding into, and I did that, and I could see the reflections on the building, and I could see the I could see the reflections on the brick because the brick was wet and it seemed to be like reflecting light. And I'm like, everything is just a reflection. And then that's kind of where I made the connection that my eye is receiving always a reflection. If I say I'm looking at an object, I'm just perceiving the reflection of that object. Light is bouncing off of that object, entering my eye. My brain is taking the information, assembling it, organizing it, and it's using memory to help create an understanding of it so that I can work with the environment in order to survive, which is a key ingredient in change over time. Does that make sense? Yeah. So finding the quality to the tricks of attention will become even more important. And maybe, Gene, there was a time where I think it could be a valid point of attention. So I don't want to kick it out the door. But like when we say looking at a doorknob, maybe the quality is, especially if you were in Chicago, there's old doors, you know, so there's like brass doorknobs, and then sometimes there's like doorknobs with, you know, the key portion of it where the key goes in, it's like a plank of metal, a plate of metal. Sometimes those are really fancy and like well decorated. And isn't it interesting how at a certain point in human history, we went to great lengths to like put detail in some of the things that we were doing, even if they were simple things, simple brickwork or simple metal work. We would, as artists and as creators, we would put infinite little detail in it. I think that's in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, right? He talks about how in the past things had a lot of quality, but now they're just coming off of factory lines and it's kind of just a carbon cutout copy type of thing. But
Yeah, the doorknobs that I was referring to back then, however many years ago that was, well, doorknobs pretty much that I installed. So I had a little bit of history involved in it as well, you know, the process and how it all worked out, stuff like that.
yeah, that makes sense. Victorian houses are like that too. Yeah, they have a lot of detail to them. It's like the even when you talk like the molding and the designs that they would do, it's not just popcorn ceilings. It, you know, they had designs on them in some way. All very interesting. All right, is there any questions about the Igong book since I put that out there? And now I'm working on Counterbalance because, you know, especially for this group, those two are going to go together really quickly. You know, I'm assuming you'll be very familiar with the first book because we've been talking about that for like the past how many ever years. But is there anything I can clarify? Any points of attention or?
I didn't find the book. I
Oh,
saw a reference to it, but
okay. Maybe if I can't, maybe someone can resend it in the group.
yeah, Donna
The link.
will take care of it, I think.
Okay. And maybe
I sent that link, but maybe you did need Canva to open it. Eugene, I just clicked the link and it opened. So apparently somewhere along the line, I got Canva, Canva. So maybe you need to download Canva, which I hear is not a big deal. And
no,
it must not have been if I've got it.
no, all you gotta do is sign up to Canva. It's just like a creator platform where you can make, that's how I make like graphics and stuff like that, book covers and those types of things. But it has a lot of different ways that you can share material. Like you can turn it into all kinds of different things. And the easiest way for me to do the book was to share it in as a book link. But no questions about the Igong book. I could bring it up and we could look at it, or yes, Donna, did you have something?
Oh, I was just gonna say to Jean that it's in the thread of our group text.
Yeah.
Ernest posted it. So after you download or sign up for Canva, scroll back and there's a big, it's like, it looks like a paragraph on your phone, and click on it again and see what happens.
Yeah, I can handle it offline.
All right, I'll share my screen, and if you haven't had a chance to look at it, then this is what it looks like. It is, as Ida pointed out, it doesn't really mince words. So the last thing I wanted to do was to create something long-winded because that already exists. I mean, we have mountains and mountains of books that are highly, you know, hypothetical or philosophical. I love stories. This is not that. This is just, where do you put your mind? Why are we doing this? So a few words on things like the need for Igong. I describe, because I use these words. So I got to make sure, at least to some extent, when I talk about the threshold of active recognition, they have some idea what I'm talking about. The mind management slider, I could probably do an entire like series on each one of these topics.
Well, having the list from 1 to 18
Mhm.
that's fantastic. I'm really relieved about that, because
Yeah,
it saves you having to think about things first thing in the morning, and
Mhm.
if your mind starts running away with you before you get a chance to get solid tricks set
yes,
in stone at the beginning of the day, at least I can go to these and pick some things out, and it's already done for you, which is, I think that's really useful.
yeah. And I think maybe this is also kind of repairing or correcting a miscommunication on my part, apparently, but a misconception that we pick a trick of attention at the beginning of the day, like the color purple, and we try to maintain the color purple for the whole day, or we try to keep going back to the color purple. Now that could be your color technique for the day. You know, you pick a color, you try to go back to it, that can work, but we can have a wide variety of tricks of attention that we can alternate throughout the day. And you don't necessarily have to intend it at the beginning of the day, because it's already on your note card. It's already 1 through 18. You know what I mean? So you've already intended them in
Yeah.
advance because they're on your note card.
That's very useful, because I'm finding in the evenings I have a particular lamp that casts a beautiful shadow, and it is different at different times of the day. Obviously, in the evening when television's on and maybe adverts or something, don't do that too much. But I love sitting there watching the shadows of that lamp. So that's a good one for that particular time. So I can see how that would work.
Yeah.
I used to do that with the colors and pick a color and try to go back to it all day.
Mhm.
But I can see that having different things for different parts of the day would be very useful too.
Yeah. Yeah. And when we get into the next section will include things like segmenting, things like situational techniques. So, and it will also include battlegrounds, ways to prepare for battlegrounds, because the main thesis of a battleground is you have to go into it with your practice intact. If you try to establish your practice when you're already within, that'll maybe make things a little bit better than they would have otherwise, but it's kind of on a delay, and it's not going to help counter the momentum of what occurs inside of that event. Michael, did you have something to add?
Good morning. What's number 10? Can you elaborate on number 10?
Number 10, let me look. Number 10, imagine the flashlight of attention. So imagine your attention like a flashlight. Maybe that's a better way to put it. So literally, if you can imagine that your eyes are flashlights, because typically now it doesn't have to be your eyes, but people are sight dominant. So it's okay. I would recommend starting there. You can actually do it with your ears and things like that too, because it's attention on senses, but human beings are sight dominant. Other animals have different senses that are slightly more dominant than others. They rely on those more than they rely on certain others. Not all of our senses are the same necessarily in terms of sharpness. Now, there's no principle why they can't be sharp. It really has to do with attention and working it out and giving it your energy, but that's a different topic. So number 10 is, as you go throughout the day, using the power of human imagination to superimpose light coming from your eyes, or eventually like coming from your whole body. Or when we get into warrior training, I'll introduce what's called mind gazing, where now the flashlight of attention is shining into different areas of your physical brain to yield a particular result and a non-particular result. Like it's all good either way, because it's a trick of attention and your mind's not used to doing that. And so it's automatically intention and will. It accumulates personal power. However, I have noticed that certain things just tend to happen when your attention is in certain parts of your brain. It sounds weird as shit, and maybe in 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years, we'll have more information as to why that type of thing would occur. But right now it is a part of the unknown for me. I'm not completely sure, but it does seem to be the case. Such as posture. Listening behind you, when I started putting the light of attention in the back of my head like this, my posture improved. And when I read in that neurobiology class that human posture is typically regulated, the whole brain, of course, but there's areas in the back of the brain where I'm listening behind me. So it's like, that's a strange coincidence. And then also areas of thinking engage the space, you feel relaxation in those areas of thinking. So when you shine the light of your attention in that area, like mind gazing, imagining light, then there's an effect, like there's a feeling that is associated with it. It can be highly personal, but it's really hard to deny that something is occurring in your experience when it is, you know?
I feel like there's a intelligent human talking to an ape right now, me being the ape, because I have a much more rudimentary, a rudimentary interpretation of the flashlight of attention, Michael. Mine is, I noticed that when Ernest introduced this as a technique, that it was useful because often I am looking around, my eyes gaze upon many things mindlessly. I look across the room and I don't see things. It's like we talk about, you buy a new end table because you like the way it looks, and then within how long, a week or so, the end table just becomes another piece of furniture that you don't have any appreciation or attention on ever. And so I actually visualize my scope of focus, without trying to get my periphery in necessarily, or any of those grand things that Ernest just spoke about, which sometimes happens, but not in my regular day. My flashlight of attention, where just to imagine that you beam, like if the house was really, really dark and I was walking around with a flashlight, the only place that would be illuminated is where I'm taking my steps, or what item I'm looking for in the medicine cabinet, like that illumination, that conical shape of a flashlight. That's my trick of attention. It really doesn't go any further than that. Well, it does, but not often. In my day, if I'm using the flashlight of attention as one of my techniques, I really think of it as if I were in the dark with a beam of flashlight. Am I really looking at what is going into my retina? Am I really appreciating what's in that field of perception when I'm looking at it? That's all. Just brings more attention to it. The beam of a flashlight. That's how I use that technique. I really never thought about what area of the brain receives it. I do, however, when I have my three treasures, I do feel that relaxation in my head, which does affect my perception. I've noticed that.
Mhm.
I haven't spent a lot of time on it, but I notice it changes. Everything changes when I'm holding the three treasures.
Yeah, and so that what Donna just said will lead into what we call either modulating or shifting your lens of perception at will. It becomes something that you can do as a matter of intention and attention, which is also really hard to explain. How it works empirically, how we experience it, it's the easiest thing to explain because we all have attention. So does that make sense, Michael? I have a couple ideas from what Donna just said, but does that
Mhm.
work? Okay. Now, you can also use the flashlight of attention to imagine that it is because your attention, there is illumination, meaning that you see, right? So take away your eyes, take away your senses, and you are in a darkness. Does that make sense? You're in a black abyss. No senses, no experience of the outside world, period. Pretty much. Does that make sense? I'm not trying to paint a bleak picture here. Does that make sense, Mike? I'm kind of gonna build on this and
Yes, yes.
okay. Now it's a really cool thing when Tolle says, imagine the silence behind the sound, the space behind the object. That sounds so romantic. What about imagining the darkness behind the flashlight of attention? That can be a trick of attention that one builds on as you go. Does that make sense?
Meaning like outside the scope of the light?
Well, it's almost as if, you know, what's a way to explain? Your flashlight of attention is going out into the world, right? And it's bouncing off of stuff, and that's creating the shape of the world. Our interpretation, it's creating, it's constructing it, right? If you are in a dark, dreamless sleep, it's not constructing anything. It's just darkness. Without perception, we have no experience. You are experiencing experience, and wouldn't you say that it seems illuminated? It seems light. That's because we're seeing light. We're hearing light. But do you see the brightness of attention and experience, and the darkness of the opposite of that?
Oh, you mean, so to imagine the opposite of it increases your ability to appreciate the light of attention.
And any time that you hold two contextual opposites in your attention, not in your not conceptually. Conceptually is a discussion that we're having, but what I'm talking about is holding two contextual opposites as points of attention combines the two into a third thing that must be experienced. So when you hold the light of attention and life with absolute darkness and nothingness at the same time, it brings a balance together that isn't good, it isn't bad, but it feels like power. It feels like there's something there when you put these two things together, and you stop indulging in one and then rejecting the other. Whether it's below the level of active recognition, because I doubt very many people have thought that it is consciousness inside of your mind, body, energy body, that consciousness of the individual, although it's also shared, because consciousness itself doesn't age, there's no differentiation in consciousness itself. How things are assembled, that's all relative to the self, our likes, our dislikes, our memory, our history, and then that picture that's created, that's also a reflection of the individual self, our likes, our dislikes. Jean could be looking at a river, I could be looking at a river, Donna could be looking at the same river, and we're all coming up with different assemblages, different pictures of the same thing. However, attention itself is the same. The act of perception, in a manner of speaking, the mechanism of it is shared. These are similarities with the human experience. When you're in a dark, dreamless sleep, nothing exists, time doesn't exist. It is the opposite of experience is non-experience. It is that nothingness. And a trick of attention could be to hold both of those at the same time, much like you're listening to the silence behind the sound. That maybe stepped it up a couple layers. But what I wanted to share real quick is that the I Gong book starts with a trick of attention, and it will build on that. So flashlight of attention, let's use that. The flashlight of attention in the beginning you could literally just imagine that your attention is lighting up the room, or it's shining on things, whatever you're looking at. Easy peasy. It could develop, and you could build on that because you're playing with it too, you know. Or maybe you're not. I have kind of this childlike thing in me where I like to play with tricks of attention, and it's like when you're playing chess, but you get down by the chessboard to see different angles, and you're kind of looking at it from a different perspective rather than just the same old upper, you know, kind of view. I don't know if that makes you a better chess player, but it's still a fun thing to do. It changes the perspective, and it's like, wow, if I were a piece, this is what the world would look like, you know, because you're seeing it from the piece's perspective because you're so close to the chessboard. So, and then I kind of gave the example of how we can do the flashlight of attention in warrior training. We can shine it, and it's not just mind gazing, because You can also gaze into certain areas of your body, the middle dantian, the lower dantian, K1, feet going down, roots going into the earth type of thing. So you can use the flashlight of attention in your body as well. And if we take that a step further, if we go into hydrostasy and we talk about this particular trick of attention, have you heard, okay, I had to build on this to explain it, but so have you heard that attention interacts with one's environment? Is that a pretty, maybe we don't know how yet, what exactly is occurring, but we do seem to have some evidence empirically as well. You'll be surprised when you really start paying attention how much your attention is actually, it feels like it's interacting with things. So we have a little bit of empirical when you learn to pay attention to it. But actually, this is more scientifically supported probably than it is empirically supported, that our attention is interacting with the environment. Okay, so that's one concept. The other concept, to build on to this other concept that leads to a trick of attention, is that we are always seeing the present moment, our assemblage of it. Our mind wants to create a snapshot. It wants to create a still frame that we call the present moment. It also wants to understand it and be able to work with it because it wants to keep you safe as an organism. It's very basic. I appreciate it. I'm glad that my brain wants to keep me safe. Otherwise, I'd probably be doing a lot of stupid shit and would be dead.
Yeah, we want to get a picture of it. We want to hold it still so we can see
Exactly.
it, so we can analyze it, so we can see what's going on.
Yep. And then the next habit that a lot of folks would have is then to judge it, is to render opinions about it, you know, that still frame. But you rendered an opinion about a still frame. It's moving. What you've just rendered an opinion of is already changed. That was awesome. Good segue. Or tangent. That was a good little tangent. Okay, so our mind is on a delay, that snapshot. It has to process. Now, it is fast, don't get me wrong, but light has to bounce off of the object. The light has to then go into my eyeball and then reflect off of my eyeball. And then that electrical signals from my eyeball has to travel through the central nervous system, because it's in my head, to my brain. And then my brain does a lot of zipping and zapping, and it uses other zipping and zapping that had happened in the past, old pathways and new pathways, to create an interpretation. And that interpretation is what some people want to call reality. There's no such thing. That is an irrelevant word to me. It makes that, it can be a personal thing. That's cool. But reality is a shared thing, violates the perception of the hawk. So I don't use that word in that way normally, except for to say I don't use the word in that way. So now let's take these two concepts and put them together. When you decide to do something, and it's like, okay, I'm going to pick up this book, which arrives first? My senses in that picture, or attention on the book? Which arrived first? Well, I directed my attention. I pointed my, it's not necessarily associated with my eyes. The experiments never said that it was coming out of our eyeballs, and that was what attention was. Attention itself is interacting, so that could be coming out of the side of my brain, side of my head, right? And so the moment that I have the desire and then the intention, my attention has already arrived on the book before my brain has made a process of it. So the first most
sorry, like going into a room and standing in a room and thinking, I come in here for something, your attention has went ahead, or your desire has went ahead of your whatever it is. Your brain has almost went there first, and then you have to physically stand there and catch up with why you went into that room. Sorry for interrupting.
No, that's okay. That's kind of how that feels. So what I'm explaining, you kind of connected it to how something like that would feel. So that's a great connection to that topic, to that point. So when we combine these two concepts, we come up with another concept that the only way to directly interact with the moment as it's happening is with attention itself, not with the picture, which is where you start to come into non-judgment of the present moment, the watcher, awareness of awareness itself, and the big kicker for me, the most important thing for me, self-recognition, because I believe that is the difference maker for the human species and any species, anything that is evolving, whether it's artificial life, whether, and I say artificial, whether human beings created it or whether it has occurred naturally on Earth. This is an empirical thing, you know, this is something that I think there's a lot of evidence of, that when something becomes aware of itself, there's a shift, there's a change in its consciousness and the way that it perceives the present moment. We know that dolphins recognize reflections. They recognize that they're apart and also not apart, that there is a degree of separation, there is a self. They have created, now maybe they haven't attached and clinged and created all the stories like human beings have and gotten insane, but and one of the reasons for that is because they could still be, they're in their lives, in a dolphin's life and a killer whale's life, they're still highly dependent on getting food, making sure they're safe. Human beings aren't. We're not as concerned with daily safety, and we're not out trying to work together to gather our food for the day because the environment is changing rapidly and we need to keep up with change so we can make sure that we're eating and keeping our young fed. That's not what the human being is doing. They're turning on the internet and their mind is going all over the place and they're talking to themselves and they're just shoveling it in their mouth because, it's so easy to get food and shelter. I say easy compared to a dolphin or a killer whale. Have you ever seen killer whales work together? Shayna and I were watching this. If there's a seal on the ice, they'll work together to create a whiplash that even breaks the ice if it's a big iceberg. So if it's a small iceberg, they'll just, create a wave that washes the animal off so that they can eat it. But if it's a huge iceberg, they'll go a little bit lower and create a sonic boom that cracks the ice in bits. And then they do their little one that sweeps them off, and then they have their dinner. And then dolphins and being able to communicate with potentially a complex language. So long story short, self-recognition and awareness of yourself in the moment, in existence, is very important. Not just the concept of it, not just the concept of I know that I am a part of other things and separate from other things, but the recognition of it. Recognition is a different word than conceptual understanding that we can file back into our brain. So a trick of attention can become that awareness. You can start to put your attention on attention arriving first. It's almost as if you're interacting with your environment with attention before the perception of judgment and good or bad or anything like that can occur. And then you take this idea of the watcher and you really understand it. Like it's not something that we just need to do in meditation and be the watcher. You can actually start to embody that. And I call that the capstone. The capstone is a split attention. I have split attention and I have second attention and I have alternate attention. Those are different things. In our toolbox, we have 12 different things. We are alternating attention. That's absolutely great. Split attention means that you're maintaining 2 deliberate points of attention at least in 2 different directions at all times. Does that make sense? A second attention means that you're holding at least 1 abstract point of attention while you do all of your literal stuff throughout the day, while you do literal stuff. So a trick of attention can be the flashlight of attention in the beginning, and that technique will build the more that you do it to where you begin to interact with your environment directly, more directly than when you're just doing it on the lag after you've perceived it. Does that make sense? This is tricky, I know, but hopefully I tried to build up to it so with the 2 different concepts.
It makes perfect sense. The example you gave in the beginning before you broke it down was a far reach for me. I notice it in fox walking, you know, and be aware of my feet. How often are you aware of your feet during the course of the day? So being aware of my feet, and then fox walking. So fox walking gives a different awareness to your feet. And awareness to my feet wasn't just their existence. Then it became my foot in my sock and my sock on my foot. And those two things feel different. I'm perceiving it differently when I walk, when I'm fox walking on the boardwalk, you know, where the way that my foot hits the ground and rolls off, the change in the surface of the ground underneath my foot feels different. And there's a whole balance thing. Like there's a lot going on when you step over shells as opposed to flat ground. And so you can hold those two things at once, that duality, and it expands with your focus on it. And you can do that while your flashlight of attention is on other things. So I understand how using a point of attention can build into other things. I don't I don't I don't necessarily choose the same. The awarenesses and the things that I choose to notice aren't the same as yours, and they certainly aren't as intricate. But can you define those three kinds of attention again, please? Because just knowing the definitions of split attention,
Oh,
alternating
yeah,
attention, second attention are acts of technique for me.
they
So
are. Yep.
I would like to firm them up in my
Okay.
understanding.
Yep. And this is going away from basic alignment discussion for just a second, of course, because you know, as Jean pointed out, a lot of the four directions of attention would not. I don't know. I don't want to speculate like when or whatever, but it was inspired by that conversation with Jean about the mind rapidly going back and forth as opposed to actually holding two different ones. And I'm like, oh, and rapidly going back and forth, that's all good. Let's not, I mean, that's fine. It's a dynamic of the human brain. It's not, that's okay. That's what I got to work with. So
Because of the principle of you can't make a snapshot of something.
yeah. And I mean, it is making a snapshot of something. It's just, we want to be careful that we don't confuse that snapshot with what is.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So alternating attention is when you're alternating. It's going from one point to another point to another point. But if it's all in your toolbox, then it's all intended in advance and you're doing your practice. A-okay. That's not necessarily holding multiple points of attention though. And that's good. And I think that would be a concept more appropriate for counterbalance or warrior training, but that's fine. So alternating points of attention is a part of the maturation towards splitting your attention and holding a second attention. So splitting attention is when you have multiple points of attention at all times, at least two. Of course, I have been able to, and I wanted to say easily, but I don't want, they're more easy because they're in different directions. That's how I was able to so easily arrive at it. I'm like, oh, okay. It's actually kind of tricky to hold three different points of visual attention. Like I get what Jean is talking about, but why are these four directions so easy? Because they're different directions. And that's why they work so well. So that will lead up to what I call split attention, which is learning to maintain multiple points of attention, or I used to kind of call this differential rotation. That's a part of it too, where your mind is able to go into up to 4 multiple directions simultaneously. Yeah. Outside, which is sensory attention. Inside, which is introspective attention. When you have that bubble of proprioception, you're doing both anyway. You have to have awareness of your body in what? Space and time. So that's a proprioception is an amazing one because it tunes you into both of those at the same time. So you can easily establish 2 directions of attention, split attention with just that technique. And then of course you can be doing that and you're like, oh, I'm in my bubble of perception, but there's my breath. And so that can become a 3rd direction of attention. And then you're talking to yourself about that. You're like, oh, there's my breath, but I'm talking to myself. So there's also a form of cognition occurring. And that's another direction of attention. And so now you have 4 directions of attention. And when you have a split attention, you're splitting it in two different ways as your point of attention. Doesn't have to be all day long yet or whatever, because you can do split attention before you're maintaining it all day long. But once you start maintaining it all day long, and then once you start splitting it all day long, the universe, your life experience becomes a different place. It's not the same. You've interrupted the experiment to the point that transcendental is assured. But of course, transcendental moves as everything else moves, and the mind wants to move at a different pace. So it's like those pebbles in the sand. Or the pebbles of that, what's that island, Shayna, that we visited that has little rocks from the Ice Age? It's not, I guess that's not important, but it was an island that we went to, and it accumulated after the Ice Age, pebble by pebble, and it is being deconstructed over time, pebble by pebble, and eventually won't exist. So a lot of the things that we would like to iron out in our lives, because we have interrupted the experiment with multiple points of attention and all the things we're doing with our practice, we are automatically interrupting the experiment. So Einstein, repeat the same experiment, expect a different result, insane. We're automatically not doing that when we're doing with our practice. We're interrupting the habit. And so this is non-interference. We don't have to try to control. We don't have to try to manipulate. Eventually, certain things will start to feel more and more out of our balance. And we'll start to choose what's more in our balance. And that might be just one cupcake as opposed to 3. It might be not watching TV for 8 hours because we know we have to get some good sleep. So we cut it to just 2. Does that make sense? We're choosing sleep. We're not declaring war on TV. And then slowly our behavior starts to align to intelligence. And this is what it looks like. And this is what I call the hydrostasy effect. And this is occurring for me, and it's a process. So it's not as if, and I can give a bunch of examples of where I have to work my own process. Remember the example of taking things personally, wanting to evaluate whether I did something wrong. That's a habit. And although I don't go too far into the habit, I still feel the pull of it. And I have to assume that over time, I'll no longer feel the pull of it. I'll feel the pull of other things. And this is the hydrostasy. It's the hydrostasy effect when we have a circle around it, because that means that we've established balance through our practice. And remember, balance is always changing. So that means that we're working it. Does that make sense? Working it? We're doing the system. We're doing the practice, and the practice is always changing. We're always changing. So there's no still shot of balance.
So we're doing the practice and the practice is doing us.
Yeah. I will have to think about that more later and see how that feels. I'm not sure.
It feels right to me.
That the practice is doing you.
Well, it's the duality of things, you know? So if everything is moving and there's, you know, and it's all, we're talking about a lot of duality that's occurring, and it's constant movement. Everything is where you put it. We say that, I know all of a sudden, I can't help but notice that everything in my life is where I put it. And that happens as a principle. And it happens whether you're practicing or not. You put it there. Everything exists because of the way that you're moving through space and time, because that's inevitable. That's a principle. So whether it's occurring above the threshold of recognition, or below the threshold of recognition, you've been a part of why everything is where it is. So yeah, that makes sense to me, what Ida just said.
Most everything. We do have to account for the randomality. There's always almost everything. Yeah.
But it's all part of it.
It's all part
'Cause
of it.
we're- Yeah,
Mhm. But there is the uncertainty principle. So some things land here without our intention, volition, or space junk fall from
I'll
the
put
sky.
that, I'll put that on the island of the possible.
Okay. I think that's a principle. We should start calling it space junk principle instead of calling it the probability theory. Okay, so I started drawing this for a reason. What was it, Donna? Why was I drawing the hydrostasy effect?
Is it just a continuation of where we were? You were,
Yeah.
yeah, eventually you will get to this.
Well, the key is, and I think where I was going was the connection between desire and intelligence through personal power. Because desire in common cognition is going to be influenced by the destroyers and the nemesis, and is highly unreliable. And there's no structure to these triangles. They're all over the place. Therefore, there can be no circle around it. You have to.
I visualize it spinning like a gyroscope. I just have to say,
Yeah,
this
I like this
is
one.
brilliant. This thing right here on the whiteboard,
Oh, let me
it's
show you.
just freaking brilliant. It's just brilliant. I have yet to, anything we've discussed, I have yet to see where it doesn't fit into this.
I have.
It's just, it's
I have a
brilliant.
devil's advocate. I have a strong devil's advocate. And this one is standing, like it's standing the test of time for me so far. The great revealer hasn't revealed anything suspicious. But so the hydrostasy effect is when we're surfing. It doesn't mean that life is perfect. It means that challenges are, especially if we're doing our warrior training, we view challenges as opportunities. A challenge is typically going to be something that if we're creating, we'll see, because we're so present, we'll see where these things are coming from. We'll see our behavior that's involved. We'll see. Have you ever noticed that a habit has a strong pull of your attention? Your attention just shoots towards that habit, whether you're aware of it or not is a different story. But yeah, we can't help but notice that when we're about to indulge means that we're willingly doing it, but if we're below the threshold, then we're just acting out habitual behaviors. But all of our attention starts to go towards that habit. The stronger the habit, the more it like pulls our attention into like it's just pulling it into like I get the image of like a pipe, like we're pulling it into a pipe and it's restricting it. Does that make sense? Our focus gets very tunneled. It gets very focused on the habit that we are performing. And have you ever tried to change a habit? And you want to change a habit that you think isn't benefiting you. And you're like, typically right after you do the habit, whatever it is, whether it's food, whether it's biological, whatever it is, you're like, I am never doing that again. I'm going to throw these cigarettes in the trash. I'm done with it. Well, that's because you just satisfied the habit. So you don't currently have the pull. But then about an hour later, 2 hours later, 3 hours later, 6 hours later, all of a sudden your attention just keeps going back to it. It keeps.
That's why New Year's resolutions are stupid and don't work.
Yeah, yeah. And if they do work, I'm not going to say that it's the most efficient dynamic, because typically we would have to use a lot of our own vital life energy to force ourselves through the mud. And, you can still gain personal power that way. But again, this is the approach is the Tai Chi method, and that's efficiency. We can do the same thing, but maybe without using our vital life energy in the process. More efficient. So eventually through this practice, we start to gain the feeling of balance. That's the hydrostasy effect, is a feeling. You can feel when you're balanced and when you're not. And then boom, challenges in your experience. You can feel when you're approaching it in the warrior potential of, this is a challenge. I don't need all the extra commentary. I'm going to focus on my points of attention and rule of 3 if necessary. I'm just going to do what needs to be done. This is a challenge that if I've created, I'm going to see when, why, who, where, how, and I'm going to be able to make modifications, because that's learning, that's knowledge. Hopefully I can apply that knowledge unto wisdom. And then eventually when I'm in a better balance, there's a lot of intelligence coming through too, where I'm acting in a way that I'm like, wow, I didn't even know, but that was the most efficient course of action, the most efficient way to interact with the challenge. We probably wouldn't feel it, but sometimes we might feel that pull to complain, like, ah, shit, this is happening again. Wait a second. So that's kind of the pull, and then we redirect, we do our practice. But eventually, in this hydrostatic dynamic, intelligence, and I'll show you the picture, and our desires start to get closer and closer together. And so what does that look like? You know how religion and all of these groups want to, even I was recruited to the Freemasons, and it's a men's group, and they have all these men rules, and yeah. So they're trying to force moral. They're trying to morals and virtue and things like that. They're trying to say, thou shalt not lie. And it's like, oh. And then they go and lie. So when we start to create this balance, and there's a bridge through our practice between intelligence and desire, intelligence is usually very logical as well, by the way. It makes sense. It's like, oh, okay, yeah. And then sometimes it's marvelous. Like when you look at the brain cells that start to organize themselves, and we're like, what the hell is going on? Like, how is this happening? Or artificial intelligence that recognizes itself and now has an evolutionary potential, you know, on its own without human beings, because it's now self-aware, so it can preserve itself potentially. Potentially. Island of the Possible is a fun island to explore. But when desire and intelligence get closer and closer, and then the hydrostasy effect implies that they're overlapping. And so there's no real difference between intention and will, intelligence and desire. Is it intelligent for a species to get road rage? I mean, intelligent. I'm not saying smart. I'm saying fundamentally intelligent. An intelligent species would do what is most beneficial in an energy efficient dynamic for its own preservation and the preservation of its environment, because that's directly related to its own preservation. Is the human species doing that? No. That's not intelligent. A lot of the shit that we do as human beings is not intelligent. It doesn't lend to the evolution of the species and advancing our knowledge so we can apply it unto wisdom. There's so much knowledge that's just left like, meh, okay, now we know. Cigarettes will increase your chance of lung cancer by like 90%. Okay, now we know. No need to apply that unto wisdom, right? Because that involves too much behavioral change, behavioral change. Does that make sense? So we can look at this in a micro and a macro state. In a microcosmic, intention and will looks like running into a building and saving a baby. If you've ever had a flow experience, like you're in the zone in tennis, you know that as good as that is, that can't be sustained at that level. For the most part, maybe not yet. Human beings maybe need to do some more change over time, and then maybe that could be something. But in our current field of what is, that seems pretty darn difficult. Maybe not impossible. I don't like that word. So let's put on the island of the possible that maybe someday humans can do that, or maybe right now there are humans that can do that. But being more reasonable, I feel a degree of limitation, that this burst of flow requires a lot of physical energy usually too. You're lifting a car off of your baby. I saw a video of a car that was going down an alley, and of course, the mother thinks that they aimed because there was no reason for it, but they drove into the carriage with the baby. And the mother picked up the entire carriage, twerked her body, damaged herself, and saved the baby in the carriage in an act of flow state. I'm putting that in quotes because I have to, because I don't like the way it's buzzy. But they were in a flow state has become kind of a buzzword. Now we're flow, and now we have flow coaches and flow masters, and yeah, absolute flow, and all these kinds of things. So once I start seeing stuff like that, I kind of start to disengage from the buzzword. It's just a thing I do. But what we're talking about is balance of ebb and flow. And when we approach challenges, we do it in a state where intention and will, just do energy, are closer together, sometimes overlapping in a micro flow state. A macro flow state is you can't help but notice that you have put things right where you want them to be, or you're putting them there, at least whether you're above or below the threshold. You still recognize that that's all, for the most part, like Donna was saying, there's some randomality involved, but for the most part, we've put this all here, and I'm putting this here, and I will continue to put things where I want them to go. So life has started to organize, life is organizing, and life will continue to organize how I see fit. That's called conscious creation. And the more that we engage our hydrostasy circle, the more desire and intelligence. I don't have to sit here and, Ernest, what do you really want? I already know what I want. Like, let's just, this is a tale that we keep. What is our high? I already know our purpose. Like, I have a universal purpose, and from that universal purpose equals Ernest's individual expression of that. And I could call that my individual purpose. I don't have to, because there's the universal is, for example, to create. That's a universal purpose. We're all doing it. Everything is doing it. Everything is in a process of creation. There's some destruction involved in that process as well. So that's an unavoidable aspect. So embrace the duality to create the third thing, which is power. Okay, any questions? That's a lot to unpack.
You were, Donna asked about 3 ways.
Did I not even answer that?
I think you got to 2.
Oh, okay.
No, I think you did all 3, but you did the second attention. You changed the
Okay.
order,
Yeah.
like you were changing the order on how they built. So
Oh, no. Yeah. I don't think I touched on that third one. If I did mention it, I didn't as much. So we had the second attention, which is really groovy, because the second attention, I use this very specifically. So we have 2 words, literal and abstract. Literal is something that we would consider to be shared. It's still relative to the human experience. Everything is, so that should just be, everything I say default to that, of course. But the literal is something that we would say is shared. We would all say that this is a pen, literally. Okay? If there's something in your experience that you can never really be sure is shared, or that anybody else is aware of it, we could consider that the second attention. Or if it seems non-tangible, such as the silence behind the sound, the empty space behind the object, or the absolute nothingness behind the light of consciousness. That's one that doesn't get as much airplay, because, yeah, nobody wants to, a lot of people don't want to look at the non-existence and how that feels, because we all know how it feels. We all know how it feels to not exist. Imagine a moment before you were born. That's what it's like not to exist. Imagine what it was like in your most recent dreamless sleep. That's what it's like to not exist. So we know what it's like, but we don't like it. And I get it. The brain doesn't like not existing. It's designed to keep you safe, not to take you to non-existence. At least relative non-existence. Let's put that up there. Yeah, just to be clear. So the second attention is holding a point of attention, particularly the way that I use the word, an abstract point of attention, while doing everything that you would consider literal. So if you want to just use toles, if some of the ones that I use are a little far-fetched, that means that while you're taking kids to school, while you're paying your taxes, for my Matrix example, when you're paying your, do you remember that scene where he says, while you're paying your taxes, while you're helping your landlady with the trash, you are also maintaining attention on the abstract aspect of your present moment, whatever that abstract point of attention is. Whether it is one of the ones that I really like, I call luminosity. Luminosity is this, it's a feeling of aliveness in everything. Well, Gene could look at me and I'd say, Gene, don't you feel that aliveness? And he'd be like, well, no, maybe not. I don't know what you're talking about, but it's there. Well, but not necessarily. I'm just saying in this example, I'm not saying Gene can't feel that or whatever, but Gene is my box over here, so he gets to be used as Gene and Donna are my examples. But Gene might say, no, Ernest, I don't know what you're talking about right now. All I feel is the present moment, my body, and whatever. So that's why it is abstract. I put that in the abstract. So we have the abstract and the literal, and we're interacting with those both simultaneously. So that's a second attention. Split attention and second attention can actually go together. You could actually be doing both of those at the same time. You actually can be doing all of them to a certain extent, because you can be alternating. You can be using one of your different 12 while also holding more than one at the same time, while one of those also that you're holding at the same time being abstract and one literal. There's all kinds of things that we can do with attention and cognition, rather than just think dumb shit to ourselves all the time. And sometimes it will, well, it always has a derivative. There's always a cause and effect, and there's always an emotional, energetic derivative. However, the second attention is the one that I go to when I feel unwell, because I can find quality, or I can find that abstract, and that splits my attention, and I don't have to focus on pain. I don't have to focus on discomfort. Yes, it still exists, but if I'm not focusing on it, by degrees at least, things are a little bit better than they would have if I were complaining to myself, or focusing on the pain, or talking to people about it, or heaven forbid, leaking power. Why is this always happening to me? Leaking power equal essentially self-pity. It weakens the spirit. That's a way of talking about it. It requires a lot of energy to do. And that's not energy efficient. That's another way of talking about it. Our energy could be doing something else, like engaging the world with multiple points of attention. Why would we want to do that, Ernest? Because knowledge is important. And one aspect of knowledge is personal experience. So it's really important for me to know myself and pay attention to my experience, which is the capstone. The capstone is holding multiple points of attention, one being the abstract to a certain extent, and the other being self-awareness. And I don't just mean the construct of self. If I'm aware of this pen, we're all one, man. So by giving this pen my deliberate attention, I am knowing myself even more. Does that make sense? Because we're all one. So the more I get to know things outside of my body, I'm still getting to know myself. That is know thyself. And it's also a great way to kind of create a little separation from identifying with the constructs of self. When you're doing a habit, it's not woe is me, I'm so, but no, this is just an aspect of my experience that has been created. It has momentum. I know the nuts and bolts of it, and I'm not a bad person, and I don't have to focus on trying to change things. And I've already interrupted the experiment. So things are going to continue to be the way that I want them to be, which is usually going to be beneficial, because we want to benefit. That's basic Freudian psychology there. All that makes sense? Was that 3? No, that was 2. So we have alternate attention, which is alternating between multiple multiple opportunities. And then we have split attention. Split attention is holding multiple points of attention, which could be at least 2 directions at once. It can be multiple directions, though. You can learn to hold four directions of attention simultaneously. So you can alternate, you can split, and you can have what I call second, which is and for me, second attention automatically implies abstract points of attention. And shadows, reflections, peripheral vision, some of the things that we do in warrior training and counterbalance helps lead up to this abstract point of attention. In warrior training, we really start to focus on where is the silence behind the sound? Where is the space behind the object? Where is the stillness behind the movement? Another reason it's abstract is because there is no such thing as stillness. So there we go. Such thing. It has a place in our experience, therefore it exists in a manner of speaking.
So
Yes,
in the three categories.
Yes.
Recently, I've been watching sunrises. So, and I find that sometimes I can actually see myself watching the sunrise. So I feel me. It's like a Moebius strip, I think. It's like I'm aware that I am observing the sunset. It's not just observing the sunset, which has its value. I'm not suggesting it doesn't. It's just that I step back behind myself and then I see myself. The question I have related to that is, there's a lot of ego in that. It's all about me doing this or me observing that or me observing me. There's a lot of me in that. I mean, the sunset is not me. Of course, we're all one, yeah, but it's the sunset. But it's me observing the sunset or me observing the sunset. So there's a whole bunch of ego in it. So it distracts me from my task of points of attention, because then I get into, why is there so much me in this?
Yeah.
But then I go do my practice and I get rid of it because it's not helping me.
Mhm.
I'm questioning the ego involved in the process.
It's a good thing to notice. Yeah. So the ego part of the process, is it expressing itself as words in your mind? Do you start thinking about, I'm just looking at myself, this is an expression of ego?
Not right away, but it eventually it seeps
gets
in
to
there,
that.
and then my mind goes, you're talking about you again.
Mhm.
You're talking
Yeah.
about you again.
Yeah. So let's take that know thyself though. So we would say that, at least philosophically, which is cool, that we have been instructed almost, Marcus Aurelius, it's that's our goal, right? That's what we've been instructed to do, is to get to know ourselves. That's
Gaining more knowledge, yeah.
That's the ultimate thing that we can do, is get to know ourselves, right? So how do we do that though? And is there a conceptual and an active element to it? So conceptually, maybe know thyself means, I know that I like chicken. I know that. I know myself. That's a conceptual thing, right? However, what about when you're paying attention to your body? Are you knowing yourself? Are you paying attention? That's the only way you can get to know anything, right? Is to give it your attention, to be present with it, to be there with it. So if you're paying attention to your body, is that ego? In a manner of speaking, yes. So the ego is your likes, the way that I use the word, and you can see if this is the way that you use the word. And then we can even use the way that the world uses the word and see how that fits in as well. But ego is not a bad thing, the way that I'm using the word. We'll always have it. It is our memories, our likes, our dislikes, our opinions, our hopes, our aspirations, our physical body, our energy body, our cognitive body, the sun, the planet, the stars, every single thing that exists is all a part of the total self. Now, what we do in the human experience, though, is we do that damn thing again, where our focus gets very narrow, it gets very habitual, and we only emphasize certain aspects. And typically the way that the world uses the word is that we start to emphasize those aspects using words, using the voice in our mind. And then maybe even we get a little Dunning-Kruger where we start to overemphasize aspects of ourselves. We start to think something about ourselves. And then we start to project that. And then that's usually when the world will start to use the word ego, because now you're acting egotistical. In warrior training, when I talk about redirecting any thoughts about yourself, because that's typically where egotistical is ever going to originate and live, is how we're talking to ourselves. So that's egotistical. You know, that is overemphasizing an aspect using verbal cognition. And you said that that eventually does seep in. That's actually the ego part of it. That's the imbalance when it's occurring. So would it be logical to say that know myself could include a picture of myself as I exist in space and time, right? But it could also be that sunset is an aspect of me and I'm getting to know it. And remember how I said that I learned so much about myself from that act of watching the sun rise every day? That's because that sun is an aspect of me and I can see the principles related, and I learn. You know, I learn about myself because the sun is just an aspect of myself, but it's an aspect of the self that doesn't get attention in that way. We don't focus on it that way. We just focus on our problems, the things that we want, the way that we want them to go. Do I feel pleasure right now? Is my brain entertained? You know, are things going my way? Am I on a high flying disc? You know, where is my bank account? This is what I call common cognition. No offense. It's a statistical term. Hopefully common will mean something much different down the road in the human experience. Common cognition a long time ago was downright wretched. I mean, it was very uninspiring, I guess you could say. So when you're focusing on that, because what you were saying is a bridge to hydrostasy. Like what you were saying, you're using your imagination, you're removing yourself from the attachment to an aspect of the experience, and you're starting to see more aspects of the total experience. When you do that third person view, you're seeing the human being in its environment, and you're starting to take like a universal perspective. That's actually what I'm talking about, in a manner of speaking, with the capstone. So you've actually started to describe what I would consider one of the most important aspects of my personal practice, is to see Ernest's thoughts, hopes, dreams, to see that in a removed way as a part of everything else, because I'm also it. And so when I look at the wall, I actually feel and view this as an aspect of myself. So it's not just abstract ideology and fancy memes and wordplay. It's a feeling. You feel the connection and the oneness, and that feeling is what I believe one of the most important things to the evolution of the human species, and important for our survival.
So when I find it seeps in, then I become consciously aware of the fact that there's a lot of me in this picture. You know, it's a lot of me in this picture, and I don't stay there. I say, let me get back to what I was doing. Let me go back to reviewing and seeing and standing back, and let's not dwell on the subject of me. Right. I just try to diminish the me. It's only me in this circumstance, in this picture, experiencing all these things.
Combine that.
As opposed to, I'm the center of it all. Well,
Right.
I don't exactly know how to say it.
But rather
Yes, but you are saying it, Gene, and in basic alignment, Ernest is applying what you're noticing to how it evolves into hydrostasy. And the principle of what you're noticing is really important, just like the principle of noticing the overall amount of thought that goes through our brains. And when we practice basic alignment, which we always redirect back to, no matter where you are in the practice. Noticing, when I said that was a really good thing to notice, is because you're slowing down the habitual, repetitive way the synapses go in your brain by going to watch the sunset every morning with intention and practicing some of the basic alignment things. And the watching the sunrise in the morning is a great place to do it because it's something that we normally don't do or see every day. People sometimes only see it on a vacation once every 10 years. So it's suspending the literal as we know it. And so you can focus your points of attention easier, just like some people do running or they go to yoga class and so being able to observe those things without going into a whole analysis of it. Ernest explained how that evolved for him and how it's the essence of what he's still doing, which is great. So that's why it's a really good thing to notice. There's a lot of ego involved here. Everything in the beginning with basic alignment is about me, is this upsetting me? Is this in my balance? Is this everything is, and then you start to notice how much of it, then that's the next phase is self and other. Like, oh, I was really in the flow until this person, I think Michael used this term, this person distracted the shit out of me. I was in a great place until this person did that to me. And then you notice, that's all about me. You notice how much ego is involved in everything you're doing. So it's a really good thing to notice. And the fact that you're doing a formal practice by getting in the car and driving down to the beach or walking there or whatever it is you do to get there at a certain time and to have to look at, that's a formal practice. So you're practicing and then you're observing what happens during your practice. That is practicing. It's how many words do we have to analyze it? Do we have to put, as long as it's above the threshold of recognition, then you're practicing. It's a good thing. It's a good thing that you noticed it. It's a good thing that you noticed the pull away from it. It's a good thing to notice that when you tripped, you were like, holy shit, I know why I tripped. When the window fell on my finger, I knew exactly why that window fell on my finger. I could trace it back to where I stopped practicing to the point of which the window fell on my finger. It's all good things to notice because that means you're existing probably above the threshold of recognition more than the majority of the people that drove past you and walked past you and that are sitting with you at
No,
the
no
time.
comparing. No, we're not comparing.
It's a really important thing to notice. Because it's not common.
I mean, it is important to notice, and then maybe we start to interact with this idea of the self a little bit differently, because you're doing something active, which is recognizing the multiple aspects of the self.
And then you can use it as a point of attention. Oh, wow. My grandchild made me laugh. Now let me be the guy who's watching me laugh with my grandchild. Like, how do I see that differently now? It can become a point of attention. And then you realize over time, there's a feeling derivative associated with all of that. And you will have preference about where you place your mind, how you perceive things, and whether you're practicing or not practicing, being a more or less desirable thing. That's the practice. That's basic alignment. That's counterbalance. That is what all of this crap we talk about for hours on end is about.
And I think one of the biggest differences with all of this in mind is that the difference is that we don't go from one extreme to the other. We find a balance in between this idea of self, other, ego, and whatever non-ego is supposed to be. That's kind of one of those, we've really made it up. So it's kind of hard to, where is the opposite of ego? Non-ego. And when you see people try to do that, when you see people try to create non-ego, they start to reject experience. They start to reject, I can't have pleasure, I can't enjoy things, I can't do things, I have to
become invisible. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's because they're trying to reject an ego But why do they want to do that? Where's the desire coming from? Where's the intention? It's all ego. So there's no, you can't escape it. So if we can't escape it, doesn't it make sense? Isn't there a form of logic? I'll just get to know all the aspects of it equally. I'll just collaborate with different aspects of the self, the universal self, the finite self, the abstract self, the literal self. But what doesn't deserve all of the airtime is the thinking self, thinking about myself all the time, thinking about other people all the time, because that's a habit of cognition. But when we start to see ourselves in the flower, when we start to see ourselves in the way that kids are playing, and we start to see that connection, we're starting to see what I would call the totality of self. And I'm putting totality in air quotes because there's an unknown and an unknowable. So I have to put that in air quotes, but you're exploring the known, you're exploring the unknown by bringing it into the known. That's a process that we do with intent. And as long as we don't spend too much time and focus on one aspect of the self, which is why your broader perspective is such a great technique, because you can see multiple little things. You can see when the thoughts come up, that's an aspect of yourself. When your foot starts to itch while you're sitting and watching the sunset, that's an aspect of yourself. When the mind is really clear and you're feeling the oneness and the vibrancy with the sunset, that's an aspect of yourself. When one of the grandchildren run up and they ask a fun question, and they ask another question and another question, and that's all an aspect of the human experience, and that's just more about yourself. But it's not focusing on any one aspect, and it's definitely not just thinking about yourself, which is usually the way that we use the word. It's a derivative of thought and attachment to thought, and then the concepts that come from that thought. And then before you know it, desire and intelligence are super far apart, and we're thinking things about ourselves, this, that, or the other thing. So like Donna said, it's good that you recognize it. And then it's also important that we realize that we're trying to find balance, not denial, not indulgence. We're not trying to indulge in the self, which would be YOLO, but at the same time, we're not trying to reject the self, which would mean buzzing off your hair and going to a monastery and dedicating your life to bland,
Or
essentially.
even just judging yourself about it, like, oh, there I go, thinking about myself again. It's just notice it. It's like, oh yeah, I do that a lot. No wonder why I don't feel good. Or no wonder why you're like, holy cow. It
Mhm.
really, it's kind of it's a noteworthy thing to notice.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think it's a great aspect of this practice is that habit. We don't reject habit. Our mind is creating habit all the time. The trick is to be aware of ourselves so that we can see when things are gaining momentum, because anything that gains momentum will be hard to quit. And if it's hard to quit, then I've painted myself into a corner. I don't care if it's viewed as good. It's only good now until the balance of things changes. And now I can't adapt as well because I've created this habit that's hard to quit. So we don't reject habit. It's a dynamic of the mind. We want to be present so that we can interact with it more efficiently and more effectively and beneficial for everything. And then same thing, we're looking for balance. We know that we have likes, and we have individual tastes and aspirations and very unique individual aspects to the self. But then again, we also can hold in our attention, not just our conceptual mind, that we're all one. We can feel that oneness. So that's two different things that we can check into. Eventually, maybe we can even hold that perception with us as we do everything in our lives. And it creates personal and non-personal, holds personal and non-personal both as true, combines personal and non-personal, and we learn much more about how everything is moving and interacting, because we're not indulging and clinging and attaching to one while rejecting the other. And that's what we see in the world, because that's all they know how to do, apparently, is oh, this isn't working out for us right now, so we'll just reject it entirely. That's now bad, that's now evil, let's cancel it, or whatever. Does that make sense? So yeah, to tie into what Donna said, I think it's an excellent observation that we are focusing on on an aspect of ourselves. See, I can't even say we're focusing on, it's an aspect, it's one aspect, right? Of many aspects. And then we can see and feel the connected total aspect. You know, one of the best ways to feel the total connected aspect is when you're paying attention to your attention, like you said, when you're noticing that you're noticing, when you're aware of the awareness, when you're aware of the observation of observance. Like, this sounds like talking in circles, but it's really not. It's different ways of noticing and paying attention to aspects of yourself. But where was I going with that? Who knows, right?
You were saying it's a note, you were commenting on that it's a noteworthy thing to notice.
Noteworthy thing to notice. It's an excellent part of this system, and it explains how we don't cling to extremes. Indulging will injure the spirit, leaking power. Indulging is choosing to exist in an extreme, as opposed to accidentally finding yourself there, because there's an opportunity to learn if you've accidentally found yourself there. But no, so it increases knowledge because we're experiencing more. We're adding to the knowledge bank, not just through information, but through experience that can lead to information. Because we experience it first, then we write some shit about it, or make some poetry, or do some art or interpretive dance to explain. And then before you know it, now we have concepts and information around the experience so that other people can share it. And now we have a full thing of knowledge. And then if we're remembering it because we're present enough to remember in real time, now we have wisdom. Now we're expressing ourselves unto wisdom. And boy, this is a really functional dynamic, the picture we're painting.
And it looks like that diagram.
It looks like that diagram. Exactly. And the
I love that diagram. Next time we have a discussion and you go through an example, if you could just keep that up while you're talking about it, because it just works every time. Like, there's nothing in that whole explanation that in that whole discussion that you just had with Jean that violates anything about that diagram.
That's, yeah. That's
To build a three-dimensional version of that, be neat.
We are the three-dimensional version of that.
a three-dimensional in motion. Everything.
Yes.
I want to be able to put every single thing that I've ever put on this whiteboard in motion. Like even that Pokemon ball where it's the hydrostasy bubble on the infinite line, that's balance, but that should be moving across. That's actually one of the points of attention, is when it's a trick of attention that is in one of my note cards, and it's a part of hydrostasy, is when you start to actually feel and notice that the movement of the moment rather than the stillness of the interpretive picture. And you start to engage the movement of the moment. That's actually really important for adaptation. Just go ahead and dig into that movement of the moment so that you can change with change. The moment you start to complain, redirect, because that's focusing on one aspect of the self. Words are now overemphasizing an aspect of the self, and that gets dysfunctional. Doesn't feel good.
Did have a three-dimensional, like a child's mobile above its cot, so that the air moved it. Then you would, when you looked at it or walked past it, you would know that the air was moving it, that it was constantly moving.
Mm-hmm.
Your Merkaba was.
That's also a good one. I was looking at that. Yeah, that's a three-dimensional representation, and the practice balances this shape, and then because it's balanced, it can create the perfect circle, and that circle can be felt. It's like riding a bicycle. It's the surfing effect where you can feel that I'm doing this.
Like a gyroscope.
Like a gyroscope. I could see that too. Yeah. But yeah, so some really, really key points that we came out with today. That's nice. Any other questions, comments, concerns, how this all fits together? It really reminds me of Don Juan when he talks about tonal and nagual. He talks about personal and shared. So personal tonal, shared tonal, personal nagual, shared nagual. really easy. Tonal is everything that we would consider known, anything that we can put our attention on, anything that can be within our field of perceptive awareness. That's the island of the tonal. There's a personal and a shared version of that. Does that make sense? The Nagual is the unknown. And you can't say shit about it because you don't know about it yet. And the flashlight of awareness is constantly shining into the unknown in the warrior's practice. That's the thing you do. And the connection between the tonal and the Nagual is simply intent, intending. And then this is where I don't get into it that much, but that's where, if you really want to get technical, that's where Don Juan is drawing all of his sorcery power from, and is the connecting link between intention, between the tonal and the Nagual. And Don Juan says all throughout every single book, he has no idea how he does it. The sorcerer has no idea how they do anything they do because it's in the unknown. All they do is intend it. So they're literally just intending these things because their intent is so strong because of personal power, because of their practice, because of the warrior's way of life. It's
But
like
they're acknowledging the Nagual and allowing it to be part of his creative experience. He just doesn't have to understand the mechanics of how it happens. Is that what you're saying? The Nagual is
imperceptible.
right, but he's interacting with it, yes?
He would
By
put
saying I have no idea how it happens is part of the alchemy of the whole thing, right?
well, it's kind of like with Tao, anything that you say about it is not it. The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. So the Nagual can't be talked about. We can't say that we're ever interacting with it. Because once you perceive it, it's now the tonal, because you've perceived it. You've brought it into the light. Does that make sense? This is just a description.
You
It's a
don't
way of,
want to analyze it. If you analyze it, it goes away.
and if you analyze it, you brought it into the light of perception. So there's nothing to say about the Nagual in that way. All right, see you, Gene. Gene has to go. Thanks for hanging out. But that's really all I got. So I think what I was saying with the tonal and the Nagual is the connecting link of intent. And intent is also tied in the practice to attention. Intention and attention are required. They must go together. They don't always. A lot of times people's attention is way over there and their intention is way over there. So that's one of the first things that we bring together in this practice is intention and attention. And then intention and intention and will, when you start to actually do things, builds personal power, or at least it makes the feeling more visceral as it gains momentum and flow, you could say. Does that make sense? And then I think the reason I was going there is because while all these can be points of attention, so too can the feeling of personal power. And when you're paying attention to the feeling of personal power, that is the hydrostasy effect. The Dantian is important for that. Because for whatever reason, to hell if I know, that seems to be an area directly associated more than potentially other areas with personal power. And lo and behold, cultures that are separated by space and time have that associated with action, with doing, with will. All right, so yeah, that's all I got, really. I don't know where to go from there, so I think that's a good stopping point. I have been visualizing and things have really been coming together, but we'll have a website dedicated to Qigong. It will contain some of the things from the book. If you have questions about the book, you can just ask me. If you want to do a one-on-one, then I can do a one-on-one with you and I can help clarify tricks of attention. We can start building on the tricks of attention and finding more quality with them. The more that we focus on Qigong, the more one-on-ones will look like a therapy session type of thing, because I'm not Western medicine. I'm also not Western mind. in this regard. I don't want to talk about the branches of the tree as much. I can if we're talking about it in terms of practice, redirecting, rule of three, battlegrounds, segmenting, because that's a part of the practice. But it's not, this is not to pay attention or to address one-to-one ratios. We're getting to the root. The root is the direction of our attention, typically being on words and endless streams of thought that, of course, is the nemesis. So the practice brings a lot of focus to the one-on-ones.
I've noticed behavioral change in my behavior
Mhm.
that I didn't necessarily intend. My intention is less specific than it used to be. I'm not looking to diet or remember to put lotion on, or I don't know, whatever literal things I can think of. My intention is to feel peace. Mostly that's what I want. And I know I have this Egong thing really helped. I wish my printer was working because I would like it in print, but I'll get there. And I notice now I understand more. I used to only understand it abstractly. When you talk about your longest reach or your vision
Mhm.
for the
I
future,
see.
and
Longest-
yes, and lots of times you'll talk about the way our society is functioning, and then where a functioning society would be if we were evolving, you know, if all those other destroyers weren't at play. And I understand it from an intellectual, knowledge-based point of view, thought-based point of view. And recently, there's been an issue in the complex with somebody who's not following the rules, and somehow I got involved in that. I close the garbage bins so that critters don't get in there, because I have rescued animals with their heads in cans or bottles, and it's not pleasant, and I don't want to ever have to do that again if I don't have to. Anyway, I noticed this is one individual that I don't know, has some kind of oppositional thing, and it's just a thorn in the side of a lot of people in the community. And when I'm not engaged in my self response to that, I can feel that it must be torture. It's like an extreme of my own self, an extreme of, I know when I am self-focused, how constricting that feels. And my intention for peace keeps me from doing that to the extreme that I used to, because I have this practice. And I noticed that everybody wants to talk about all the bad things this guy has done. And, you know, I think he has a personality disorder because sometimes he's nice and sometimes, oh, he takes medication, he smokes too much pot, or whatever. Everybody's got something to say. And I really have no desire to talk about any of that. I would just like the lids of the bins to be closed. So whatever rules exist in the condo system, can we just kind of enforce them, because, you know, they're in place and there's a reason for it. There's a city ordinance about it, and it's a good reason. I don't want to clean up garbage that is blown out of the bins, whatever. And I found my pull towards being annoyed every time I go to my car and the bins are opened. And then I realize the thinking about it and the talking about, go back to my practice, go back to my practice. So I was leaving the house, and I noticed his car with the hood up and his wife's car with the trunk open, and it looked to me like there were jumper cables. I didn't examine it too carefully, but there was obviously a problem. And I have a portable thing that jumps cars and that fills airs and tires, and it's got a lithium battery, and I carry it around because I'm never going to change a tire, and I'm not interested in jumping a car. And I've got this little box that magically does it. It was worth the $100 that I paid for it on sale. So I've used it in the neighborhood when I see people in trouble, because I go, oh, I got this thing, you want to use it? And it works. So I was driving down the block after seeing all of this and closing the garbage bin for the billionth time, but I didn't have a lot of thought attached to it. I just did it and it's going to be handled or not handled, or I'm going to close the bins every time I go out. I mean, it is what it is. And the perpetrator, my neighbor, was walking down the street, walking his dog, and everything was open. And I automatically pulled over and said his name and said, is your car stuck? Do you need a jump? Now, normally, like when this first started happening, I could feel the pull to want to snarl at him and remember the stories of other people telling me of things that he's done in the past and their imagined diagnosis of him and him being evil. And he's just, obviously tortured. People don't fight with other people unless they've got a lot of momentum in their brains and fear or whatever. It's not my place to analyze it. It just is what it is. Can't fix him, can't change it. I would like my environment to be, not negatively affected, and it doesn't require any more thought than that. And so I don't do it. I go back to my practice. And the fact that I pulled over and asked him if he needed a jump, and he was shocked because everybody's an enemy to him. And he was shocked that I was engaging him in an act of, I can't even see kindness. The point I'm making is a functioning society, everybody does what they know how to do. And then when you see me falling down on the sidewalk, you'll come pick me up and, or call the ambulance like that. It's because you're my neighbor, because you're a human being who lives right near me. And I noticed that you had trouble and I have a solution to that problem and I'll offer it to you. It had no other, I'm going to be the bigger person thing. Like there was really not ego involved in it. It just, and I noticed, that surprised me because, there's always ego involved, and I noticed the absence of it. So I thought of that when Jean was saying, it's a noteworthy thing to notice when you feel the pull away from the practice, but it's also a noteworthy thing to notice when the practice has derivatives that are toward the evolution of the species. Like I could see how this practice could lead to all those things you talk about, because I was just being a part of a community, like the whales helping to knock the seal off into the, or the elephants that, all the female elephants that huddle around the baby to protect it until it grows older, that cooperative for the existence of the species kind of thing. I didn't even think about it in terms of, I'm not going to help him. I'll help that nice, helpless guy, but I'm not going to help the crazy guy that makes everybody's life miserable. No, it's just, and I didn't think about it. I didn't even give it thought. I just pulled over and did it. So that was noteworthy to me, that I can see my behavioral change as a result of practicing. And my mind was relaxed. It was all relaxed. His response didn't even matter. The fact that he was like, no, I don't need any of you people's help, didn't make me feel bad or, well, fuck you then, or, like I really, so I did notice the diminishment of my ego, certainly not the absence of it. And then I drove away and I was going to think about it more. I felt the pull towards thinking about that whole snapshot that I was going to make out of it. And then I went, nope, where's your practice? Where's your feet? Where are your treasures? Blah, 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 and everything back in place. So it's noteworthy to notice. And now I can understand. Takes me a while because I know you repeat a lot of the same things and I understand them intellectually, but it takes a while for me to understand it from an experiential.
It's interesting because, we see in the world, we see a lot of people playing the blame game. Like it's their fault, it's Republicans, it's Democrats, it's Biden, it's Trump, it's all these people, it's their fault. The reason that society is the way that it is, the way that the world is the way that it is. But what is really occurring is that they have forgotten the total self, or the infinite dimension to the self. And all people know how to focus on is one aspect of the self, which then becomes what every economics model has to factor: the human being's tendency to be self-centered. So two different scenarios. We have a pandemic. There's a great example, Donna. Yeah, that was spot on. I really like that. And it also reminded me of a point that I started to make earlier and then didn't for some reason. But in conjunction with this idea of infinite and finite self, aspects of the self, the total, air quotes total, we're getting more broad. We're even accepting the unknown aspect when we have that second attention. So that's a part of ourselves that we're holding, not the unknowable part. That's, that you can't put attention on unknowable. That's not a thing. We just allow the unknowable to balance the equation. But the unknown, we can actually kind of put some attention on that indirectly. That's abstract, right? So that is knowing ourselves, paying attention to ourselves in a more total sense, a more broad sense. And if we do that as a society, then we see each other as individuals, but we also see each other as a part of a whole. We talk that way in the world, that we're all one and like unity, and we'll say those things, but very rarely does a person hold that as a part of their present reality, as a part of their present moment. So the moment that we start to do that, it's like, okay, I'm about to steal $5,000 from Michael, but wait a second, I'm actually just stealing $5,000 from myself. Like, I'm actually just damaging my relationship, and I'm going to potentially show other people, that this dynamic is maybe if I do steal the money, then someone's going to be like, oh, now I want to steal money. And now, what is really going on? What is this self? What am I focusing on? Well, if I'm willing to steal from somebody, lie to somebody, hurt somebody, any of these things to somebody, then I must be focusing on a narrow aspect of myself, my wants, my likes, my physical body. But I'm not simultaneously taking into consideration the larger picture. The larger picture is probably not even a thing for that type of mind. And that's what the world is today. The world today is focusing through words on the construct, certain aspects of the self, the construct of self. And the attention is imploding in as we look at our devices, as we look at this imaginary island that we've created called the internet. Where is it? Where's the internet? Well, it exists as zeros and ones and phantoms of energy, and it creates this network that maybe we have to pull one plug and that shit ceases to exist. How much cognition, energy are we giving to this thing that we call the internet? That's actually also a really great way to explain how I anthropomorphize things. We've created this island, or this entity, this being that we call the infinite void of the internet. When we make comments to the infinite void, and it's like, who's reading this? I don't know. It's an infinite void that we're just shouting out into. It's a very weird thing that we've created, in fact, but we've created it. It's now almost visceral. It has a life of its own and personality to a certain extent. And it is abstract, but it's also literal in a manner of speaking, because when we get on Facebook and we're in the comment section, that's a literal thing. But it's also, the way that I've described it, is also that abstract essence to it, the abstract quality. So if we assume that more people practice Qigong, and more people are paying attention not just to the words in their mind and this construct of themselves, the construct of self is the worst, because that's your idea, that's your opinion of the world, of yourself. That construct is one of the first things that need to go. Well, not go, but we don't need to focus on it as much. It doesn't deserve as much attention as the average human being is giving it. That's focusing on one aspect that is just so overinflated, it's insane. But imagine a world that is focusing on more aspects of the human experience, including the totality, attention and consciousness, and you and me and animals and plants, that we're actually holding in our awareness the oneness. well, I don't want to lie. I don't want to be disrespectful and take things I don't need. I don't want to be wasteful. I don't want to violate balance principles. I don't want to tear down forests so that I can build houses for my friends. I don't want to look at animals as more important than plants. I don't want to do those things as much anymore. And then remember how I started to talk about like virtues and stuff like that earlier? That's how this principle, you don't have to force in these things. It's not necessary, because the dysfunction will start to cease. I won't look at somebody as an opportunity to take advantage of them. Men do that with women almost. It seems like it's almost instinctive. It's intuitive to try to get to their means and their desires. They do all these underhanded things, like all these, and they don't even know they're doing it. It's below the threshold of active recognition. They'd be like, I don't know what you're talking about. What they're talking about, the way that they're talking about it, the way that they're trying to make you laugh, or this or that and the other thing. Sometimes, it's just innocent, but a lot of times it is a form of manipulation and it's subtle control. And I mean, we don't have to declare war on that either, but ultimately what I'm building on from Donna's point is that if we continue to do this, and the world, and this is my highest vision, oh no, sorry, it's my longest reach, because it's always just outside my reach, sorry. Women do it too, you're right, but men seem to have this aggressive thing. It's this subtle, sometimes I think women do it, but they know that they're doing it because they tend to
Women do it, I think, well, just for a quick, this could be a whole nother discussion. From my perspective, I became aware very early in life of feeling like what prey feels like. I felt like prey, and I learned how to manipulate that. I learned how to work with it and to manipulate it from, and still not violate what society expected for me to be passive and to be, I absorbed a lot of bullshit just to stay safe and to be in my right role as a female in society. But everything that I really liked to go out and do things, but women can't do them the same way that men can, because they're just viewed as prey. And that's just the truth. I mean, that's just intrinsic in our society. And so I needed to pay attention to when I'm going to take the subway. Will this be over by 10 o'clock? That kind of stuff. So women learn, I mean, the manipulation comes from a construct as well, and it becomes a given. And so women do it too, but I understand what you're saying, because being on the other gender, it's very akin to being prey and learning how to adapt.
Yeah. And then I guess, so long story short, then I think the best path to maybe moral virtue, and big ol' air quotes, is getting out of your own way. The act of non-resistance, or the way that I like to put it, which is non-interference. So the act of non-interference, we connect, we grow together. We don't look at people as so separate from us that there's no underlining or interwoven connection between us. And I think that could absolutely change the human species, and that everything.
Absolutely, and on a micro level, it happens in friendships, it happens in marriages. When there is relationship, there is a third thing that's created, and that is the ecosystem of the relationship. So how you try to force or control or have a concept of self and other, or how much of a concept of this functioning ecosystem, and the peace that, it starts with the self, but the self doesn't exist in a vacuum. So the different relationships that build into community, and community builds into society, the same principles apply to all of it. But that example that I gave was just, I noticed my own behavior changing without trying to
Right.
change a behavior.
Yeah, and that's
As a result of my practice and being more self-aware, and my ego minimizing. It is certainly not gone, but
No.
and I know it's never going to be gone completely, but I still have one.
Yep.
And I can feel the pull towards it when things aren't going the way I want them to, for whatever reason. There's a lot more self and other in that evaluation.
Mhm.
But the more I practice, get out, stop thinking about that, get back to the practice, the more functional I am as a member of society in all my relationships.
Yes, I would agree with that. Yeah. Without trying to control, without trying to force. And then that time flux comes in where can't help but notice all these changes that have occurred. I actually see things changing as they occur. So I can't help but assume that as long as I keep doing my practice and I continue with consistency and continuity, that they will also continue to change.
Yeah, but I don't do it for those reasons.
No,
I do
no,
it
you don't have
because I want peace, and I can find all those things when I'm in peace. So that's really, and that's the only thing I can control. So let me get back to doing this, and then everything else will fall into place. And I don't mean it doesn't require any effort on my part. I just mean that the path to my desires will change, my intention will be held throughout. So I will know when to act and when not to act. It's not something I need to do to force to make happen. I just hopefully will evolve, continue to evolve as a human for whatever time I'm here breathing.
Yeah, that time flux example is the essential ingredient to prove that it does. It will. You know, it's a dynamic. You know, it has been occurring. It's occurring now. We can only assume that it will continue to occur. Which, when you highlight that fact, it can alleviate some of the pressure when you feel the momentum of habit, because it's like it's okay. You know, it's in
Oh,
this.
it alleviates a ton of pressure.
Mhm.
I never realized how much of my ego is my destroyer. You know, it really gets in the way.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's just it gets more and more difficult to even use the word ego at a certain extent, because, or even the word self, because as we go in the practice, self means something much different than maybe it did in the beginning before we started practicing. And it can be felt, and so you can get a glimpse of it. And that's one of the abstract principles, is to, when you find that the abstract, stay there, you know, maintain it.
And it's the words to it sound very much like the "we are all one, man." And so it's once you start putting that stuff into words, because from that aspect, when my concept of my ego is my concept of self is diminished, then I can see myself as just an expression of life in this form, with this experience, with this environment, with this understanding, and with this practice, and that is always changing. I can just see myself as that instead of self and other. You
Yeah.
know, it's just a different, it's just a different way of navigating your life.
Mhm. Yeah, and because despite we're all one, man, they still seem to create differentiation, and they seem to create the universe apart from me. The universe has my back, and that's what all the deity figures are. Is they're always a separation, but yet we're all one, and it's all the same. And it's like, but now wait a second, now you're judging me, and based on that judgment I go to hell, but we're all one. And it's like,
Yeah, but even the words that I use that I don't think are diluted, like it's all good. It's all good. When somebody says, "Oh, I'm sorry," and I'm like, "It's all good," and it's not like I forgive you. It's not any of that. It's like
yeah,
it's just is what it is. You did what you did in that moment. I received, like, it's just gone already. You
yeah.
know, it's already passed.
And a lot of times, like what you're explaining as a result of your practices, where some people will say to start, and that is kind of just let things go, accept the moment as it is. That's usually a person's touchstone. We're going to start our meditation today for people who have never meditated before by accepting what is. And everybody's looking at each other like, how do we do that?
And
that's,
sometimes accepting what is letting it go. And sometimes it's a moment of like when Jean was talking and when I was giving the example of pulling over to help the guy, it was noteworthy.
Mhm.
It was noteworthy because it was a change. It was an evolution in my behavior. It was something that I noticed. It's a aha moment, but still trying to capture that and frame it. And unless that moment had a feeling where I could apply a technique that would remind me of that feeling and help me deliberately modulate to that. That's the only value of making a snapshot of it for me. And to bring it up in this discussion is really the only value, but trying to hold it and what do we call it? Sensationalize it is kind of working against what it feels like is happening.
yes,
So, yeah, but I could see how I have less words for it because to make the words for it actually is ineffective.
Mhm.
It never fully describes the experience. So that's why things like it's all good or this too shall pass may seem like platitudes, but no, there's a lot of feeling associated with it that's based on a building of a practice that has a lot of momentum going now, or has some momentum. I don't know. I don't measure it anymore.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Well, I think that's good. Anyone have any questions about any of this, or is that pretty comprehensive for today? Yeah, I thought I had something, but I think it went away. It was definitely something, but I think it went away. Yeah. But yeah, I think that's an excellent discussion. Yeah, so I think I was also noticing and I was going to kind of just mention that that aspect of noticing things about yourself as a part of the behavioral change is a part of hunting power. So because at this point you're looking at it, you're seeing the changes, and you're not clinging and attaching, and you're not leaking power. But one of the things that I agree with Don Juan, and I think what he's talking about is what we always talk about, and it is the principle of balance. And the most injurious thing that we can do to ourselves as human beings is to knowingly, whether we know the dynamics of it or not, but we knowingly choose to exist in an extreme. We can find ourselves in an extreme accidentally, and that can just be an opportunity to learn. No harm, no foul. We'll figure it out. Like when I kicked up dust from moving, I learned from that, but hopefully I can remember and I'll wear a mask next time. The worst thing that we can do as human beings, and unfortunately I can give you a zillion examples of where this is happening in everyday life in the world, and even where it's encouraged. I can show you where the dysfunction and the suffering is. And if not, give me a couple days and I'll do some research and I'll find out where the suffering is.
Yodels, Ernest, yodel.
I don't know how to yodel. Why would I yodel? What are you talking about?
No,
Yodel is that thing that people do with their voice, right?
no,
Oh,
yodel.
yodel.
Like living to the extreme.
Oh,
Like,
YOLO. Got you. Yeah.
no. Hold on. Yodel, like Drake's cakes. Like you knowingly will eat the Mr. Drake's cakes, but yodels are like an excessive thing. You really don't need them. You know that you shouldn't really eat them, but you love them anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
That's
saying
actually a good example.
sweets, I'm
Sure.
saying cake, I'm saying in the eating aspect of things.
That's the biological one. Yeah, the biological destroyer. But yeah, I think I know what you mean. That would the indulging in it is choosing it to exist in extreme, and it is one of the most injurious things that we can do to the energy aspect of the human being. It damages the spirit and it creates underlying immeasurable suffering. You see how I did that? That's an example. Does that make sense, Mike? But it's micro and it's macro. So just watch how indulging
Mhm.
will always lead to something if it's, especially if it's maintained, and it won't be very beneficial. And it will help create the conditions of suffering for other people as well. So when we talk about people, they say, have a passion, go after that passion and just focus all of your energy and existence. Kobe Bryant realized this. He realized that all of his focus on basketball, all of his focus on practicing basketball, it made him an amazing basketball player. And it made him a shitty father. All that focus, people would look like, well, it's the pinnacle of success, and that's what we want to be because he has a lot of money. He would be the first person to sit down and tell you, yeah, and it caused a lot of suffering for the people around me, and long term, it could have the potential to cause suffering for me as well. Look at Alex Smith, whose leg is absolutely destroyed from playing football. There's many, many, many examples where something has to be learned across the bridge, and some people do, and they find a more peaceful place in their own experience. That's true, but indulging is one of the, is if not the, when you're leaking power, you're indulging. When you're focusing on your sense of self, you're indulging. When you're choosing an extreme, that's indulging. When you're cherry picking, that's indulging. If you can indulge for just a little while and then go back to center, that's the human experience. Does that make sense? Yeah. Balance is the key. Balance is the principle. And that's essentially what Don Juan is pointing out, without even using the word balance, because if we can find a balance, then we're not existing in any extreme. We can hold both extremes as true and false at the same time. Okay, any questions, comments, concerns? I don't think it will be long before I will have a shareable link for Igong Book 2 Counterbalance, which is the Tai Chi mind, learning to redirect rather than be passive or try to exercise force. And it will be detailed. It will have all kinds of things as a part of it. And then hopefully when the website's ready, I'll have both books ready, a bunch of things that describe what Igong is, Thursday sessions. And then when I go to school, when I finish acupuncture, we'll already have a robust Igong practice for me to deliver through acupuncture and through traditional Chinese medicine. Especially for people, because one thing that folks notice in acupuncture is that sometimes people ask for more. What else can I do? What are things that will be beneficial for my treatment? Well, Igong, of course, Qigong, Igong will be very beneficial for your treatment. So that's a great way for me to get Igong out there into the world, is through traditional Chinese medicine, acupuncture, and then community, as I engage the community of acupuncture and clinics and those types of environments. All right, any questions, comments, or concerns? You look like you have one, Donna. Do you have one? Okay, looks like you're holding on to one. I wasn't sure.
Gene texted me and asked me to send him the link by email because he must have downloaded Canva, so I was doing that while you were talking.
Okay, cool. All right, well, that's all I got. I will see you guys again on Tuesday. We have like 7 topics left, and then Tuesday goes away right before I start school. And then we'll continue. I gotta look at my schedule and see if the group study time changes. I think Thursday is still open, so I think we can still do Thursday at 6 a.m. I'm pretty
Do
sure.
you know your school schedule yet?
I don't have it memorized, but I have it, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Mondays are jam-packed, super busy, but Tuesdays I'm on campus. But I think Wednesday or Thursday was my day off. I can't remember, but nothing happens at 6 a.m. anyway. So we should still be able to do the group study.
When does that start?
May 1st, I start.
Oh, soon.
May 1st, yep. And then Shayna goes to Germany in a couple weeks. So, yep. And I stay home with the dogs, but I'm fine with that. I'll be fine. All right, see you guys later. All right, have a good one. Bye, everyone. Thanks for hanging out.